What happens when love doesn't leave in anger, but slowly disappears in silence? It doesn't scream. It doesn't slam doors. It just stops showing up. Brianna stood in the kitchen, lighting 2 candles even though she knew, deep down, she'd be blowing them out alone. The table was set, her favorite lasagna baked in the oven, filling the house with the warmth of something homemade. A soft jazz record played in the background. She wore the sapphire earrings Cooper had given her on their 25th wedding anniversary, back when he still noticed those things. The clock ticked. 7 o'clock. No call. 7:30. No message. 8:15. Just a photo from Cooper, sent to the family group chat. It was a picture of him with his team at another business dinner. The caption read, "Closing the year strong. Grateful for a great team." Not a word about their 38th wedding anniversary. Not even an emoji. Brianna sat at the table and slowly began to eat, fork scraping across the plate like a whisper. She didn't cry, not because she wasn't hurt, but because the pain wasn't new. It was the same ache she'd been carrying for years, tucked between holiday toasts, polite smiles, and lonely weekends. Cooper hadn't cheated with another woman. He'd cheated with time, with his job, with the idea that after this quarter, after that merger, after just one more meeting, he'd finally become the husband he once promised to be. That one day never showed up. Not for birthdays. Not for Christmas. Not even for their anniversary. That night, in the quiet of their shared bedroom, Brianna stared at the ceiling and felt something shift, not in anger but in clarity. She didn't say a word to Cooper that night. She just turned off the light and closed her eyes, feeling more awake than she had in the lawyer's office smelled like paper and peppermint. It was small, neat, filled with quiet authority. Brianna clutched her purse like a life vest, fingers trembling slightly as she handed over the form. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The word divorce stared back at her in bold black print. For a moment, she imagined Cooper's face if he could see it. Confused, maybe even betrayed. After all, how do you explain to someone that it wasn't one moment that broke you, but all the ones that never came? "Are you sure?" the lawyer asked gently. Brianna nodded, eyes steady. "Yes. I'm not leaving because I stopped loving him. I'm leaving because I kept loving him, and he didn't notice." Telling the kids was harder. Marcus was furious. He called it selfish. Anna tried to understand, but couldn't hide the disappointment in her voice. "You were married almost 4 decades, Mom. Can't you try counseling or something?" But Brianna had already tried everything. She had tried silence. She had tried patience. She had tried pretending. And after all those years of trying, she was tired of only being half married to a man who mistook being home for being present and being busy for being needed. When Cooper finally realized she wasn't bluffing, he sat across from her in the living room, stunned. "I never cheated. I worked hard for us, for our future." "That future never included me," Brianna replied. "Not really. Not in the way I needed." There was no shouting. No name-calling. Just the heavy stillness of 2 people finally speaking the truth out loud. After 38 years of marriage, she filed for divorce. Not because she hated him, but because she had disappeared in the relationship long before he ever noticed she was fading. The hardest part wasn't letting go of Cooper. The hardest part was letting go of the life she imagined they would still build. But in that loss, something else was beginning to rise. Not loudly. Not quickly. Just quietly, like the way morning fog lifts to reveal a horizon you didn't know was there. The first morning after the papers were signed, the house felt different. Not louder, not quieter. Just emptier. The kind of emptiness that had always been there, but now it echoed. She still made 2 cups of coffee. Habit was a stubborn guest. But this time, she only drank one. The other stayed on the table until it went cold, untouched. Like all the conversations that had waited too long to be had. Brianna didn't cry that morning either. She just sat in her robe, watching the steam rise and fade, wondering how long it would take for the absence to feel like peace. Sometimes, grief doesn't come with funerals. Sometimes, it comes with freedom. Friends called, some out of genuine concern, others out of curiosity. "So, are you dating again?" "No. Are you okay?" "I think so. I don't really know yet." Everyone expected her to either collapse or reinvent herself overnight. But what she needed was space. Not advice. Not makeovers. Not weekend getaways to cheer her up. She went on long, slow walks. Past the park bench, where she used to wait for Cooper on Sunday mornings. Past the corner bakery, where she once picked up his favorite cinnamon rolls. Past places that once held memories, now just locations on a map. It was on one of those walks, by the lake, that she noticed something strange. The silence didn't feel so heavy anymore. It wasn't loneliness. It was solitude. There's a difference. Loneliness is the ache of absence. Solitude is the gift of presence with yourself. Each step on the path felt like unlearning something. Unlearning that her value was tied to being needed. Unlearning that sacrificing her happiness made her a good wife. Unlearning that age meant endings, not beginnings. She saw couples pass her by, young, laughing, holding hands. Once, that would have made her feel forgotten. Now it made her feel hopeful. Not because she wanted that again, but because love, real love, still existed. Even if she had never truly received it the way she deserved, she hadn't stopped believing in it. She just finally stopped settling for its shadow. One evening, Brianna stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. The woman staring back at her looked familiar, but different. Older, yes. Softer around the edges. But also stronger. Sharper in the eyes. Like someone who had been through fire and came out shaped, not scorched. She touched her face gently. "You're still here," she whispered to herself. "You've always been here. The greatest rediscovery is the one where you find yourself, after everyone else forgot to look." She had spent decades being someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's supporter. She didn't regret that. Love had been real, even if it had been one-sided at times. But somewhere along the way, she had become a background character in her own life story. Now, she was ready to write herself back in. It started small. A painting class on Tuesdays. Trying yoga for the first time, even if she couldn't touch her toes. Rearranging the living room furniture, just because she wanted change. She bought herself flowers without waiting for a special occasion. She danced alone in the kitchen to old Motown records. She read novels she never had time for. And each of these things felt like adding color back to a black and white world. Divorce didn't make her free. It reminded her that she already was. There were still tough days, of course. Nights when she missed the sound of Cooper's keys jingling at the door. Mornings when the silence stretched too long. But even in those moments, she knew. She hadn't chosen divorce because she stopped believing in love. She chose it because she finally started believing in herself. And slowly the question stopped being, "Why did I wait so long?" It became, "What else is still waiting for me?" It started unexpectedly. At the grocery store, a woman tapped her on the shoulder. "Excuse me, your hair is stunning. Is that your natural gray?" Brianna laughed. "Yes, it is. I used to cover it, but lately I've been letting it speak for itself." The woman smiled. "It's beautiful. You wear it well." She didn't know it then, but that small moment would stay with her all week. Not because of vanity, but because she realized how long it had been since anyone had really seen her. Not as a wife. Not as someone's mother. Just as her. When you stop shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's world, you start becoming visible in your own. She began to notice more things like that. The barista at her favorite cafe remembered her order and asked how her weekend was. The neighbor who used to wave from afar invited her to a backyard barbecue. Even the mailman lingered a bit longer to chat about the changing weather. It wasn't about seeking attention. It was about allowing life to reach her again, now that she wasn't buried under 1,000 quiet disappointments. Her world didn't explode into something new. It simply began to bloom again, slowly, like spring after a long, silent winter. But with the blooming came questions. Sometimes from others. Sometimes from herself. "Do you ever think of going back?" her sister asked one afternoon. Brianna paused. "No," she said softly. "Not because I don't love what we had, but because I finally understand what I need." And what she needed wasn't a return to the familiar. It was permission to keep going, even if the road looked uncertain. Healing isn't loud. Sometimes it looks like drinking your tea while the sun rises, and realizing that peace is no longer a stranger. Her divorce didn't leave her bitter. It left her aware. Aware that presence without connection is its own kind of abandonment. Aware that love, without nurturing, slowly starves. And most of all, aware that being alone wasn't the same as being lonely. She had lived in a house with a man who said all the right things, but left her heart waiting at the door year after year. That was loneliness. This was solitude. Deliberate. Sacred. Necessary. She didn't need to be needed anymore. She needed to belong, first and foremost, to herself. The divorce was final, but the real liberation came later. Not in courtrooms or signatures, but in the ordinary. It came when she walked into a bookstore and didn't rush. When she made dinner exactly how she liked it, without worrying if Cooper would eat it. When she turned off her phone on a Sunday and just listened to the breeze whispering through the curtains. Freedom often arrives dressed as small choices. But each one is a rebellion. Each one is a reclamation. She had no desire to be part of a couple again. Not because she was afraid, but because her soul had grown quiet, calm. She wasn't looking to fill a gap. She was learning how to let the gap be a space where she could breathe. Cooper had reached out once. A polite message. No apologies. Just, hope you're well. She stared at the screen for a long time before simply deleting it. She had no desire for closure. She had already given herself that. That too was an act of love. Because she finally understood, some men don't leave you for another woman. They leave you slowly, for everything else they said would one day be done. One more meeting, one more call, one more year until things settled. But things never settled. And neither did she. Not until she walked away. Some goodbyes don't sound like slammed doors. They sound like silence that's finally respected. At her age, society had quietly handed her a script. Endure, tolerate, accept. Be grateful for what you have. Don't rock the boat. Don't start over. Don't you dare talk about divorce when you've already made it this far. But Brianna burned that script. Because staying in a house that feels like a waiting room is not a life. It's a sentence. And she chose freedom over familiarity. She chose silence with dignity over conversations full of obligation. She chose herself not because she stopped loving him, but because she finally started loving her. In that choice, there was grief. Of course. But there was also something deeper. Peace. Possibility. Power. It's never too late to become the person you were always meant to be. And while the world may still whisper behind her back, wondering why a woman at 63 would dare to begin again, Brianna simply smiles. Because she's not starting over. She's simply starting for the first time, on her own terms. She used to avoid mirrors. Not out of shame or vanity, but because they reminded her of the years. The tired eyes. The slow wrinkles that told stories no one ever asked to hear. She had become a master of brushing past her reflection without looking too long. But something changed. One quiet morning she stopped. She looked. Really looked. And instead of seeing lines of regret or years she couldn't get back, she saw something else. Soft strength. Gentle defiance. A face that had carried grief and still smiled. The woman staring back was no longer someone's wife, no longer tethered to expectation. She was simply Brianna. And for the first time, that was enough. Divorce doesn't just separate people, it separates illusions from truth. She thought about all the years she had spent hoping Cooper would notice the small things. Her favorite song playing in the background. The way she lingered over family photos. How holidays felt more like performances than celebrations. She had begged silently for connection, without ever raising her voice. But silence, she learned, doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it's just a slow erasure. The divorce didn't happen all at once. It unfolded across decades. Every time she bit her tongue, lowered her needs, and convinced herself that maybe next year would be different. And yet, here she was. At 63. Whole. Not bitter. Not broken. Just aware. Aware that staying too long in the wrong place teaches you the wrong things about love. Aware that leaving isn't failure, it's clarity. Aware that starting over is not a punishment. It's an invitation. Some women don't escape a bad marriage. They awaken from a quiet one. On her porch, with the scent of lavender in the air and a half-finished book in her lap, Brianna reflected on the word divorce. For so long, it had carried weight. Stigma. Pity. But now it sounded like freedom. It meant she had made a choice. Not against Cooper, but for herself. And that made all the difference. She wasn't chasing happiness. She was cultivating peace. No longer waiting for someone else to make her feel alive. No longer giving parts of herself away just to keep the peace. No longer apologizing for wanting more than the bare minimum. She had no bucket list. No burning urge to prove anything. She had already done the bravest thing. She walked away from a life that looked fine on the outside, but felt hollow on the inside. That takes courage most people never find. Now, when people ask her how she's doing, she doesn't say fine anymore. She says, at peace. She says, still learning. She says, grateful that I finally chose me. Divorce didn't ruin her life. It returned her to it. And on one particularly quiet afternoon, as she closed her eyes and let the breeze kiss her face, Brianna whispered a thank you, not to anyone else, but to herself. for not giving up, for trusting the whisper that said, there must be more than this, for surviving a slow kind of loneliness and daring to believe that joy could still find her. She had walked through the grief. She had faced the silence. And on the other side, she didn't just find herself, she found a life that finally felt like hers. Sometimes the most powerful love story you'll ever live is the one you write with yourself. Have you ever experienced something similar, or do you have a different perspective on what I shared in this video? Each story has its own details, and that is precisely what makes the exchanges here so rich. I like to think that we are building a space for real conversation, where each comment adds a new layer of understanding. If something touched you, made you think, or even disagree, leave it here in the comments. I would love to know what you thought, and subscribe to the channel